Hello, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Northwest Newsweek. A coroner's inquest began Monday regarding the 2016 shooting death of Daniel Lagarde at the hands of the OPP. The mandatory inquest is being held at the Nipigon Legion Hall. The jury will hear from 18 witnesses over a 2-week span. Carl Langdon was there for day one and files this report.
Friends and family have gathered at the Nipigon Legion this week for the coroner's inquest into the fatal officer-involved shooting of 45-year-old Daniel Lagarde. The inquest seeks to determine whether the incident will be ruled as a homicide or as a suicide, after Lagarde was shot in the abdomen, approaching officers holding a knife. Among the people expected to testify are the officers who attended the call, including the one who pulled the trigger. The inquest marks the first opportunity that Lagarde's loved ones have had to hear details directly from witnesses, potentially answering questions that have continued to linger to this day. But the 7-year wait has meant that not everyone will get the chance, including Lagarde's mother, who has since passed away. The Lagarde family's lawyer, Devin Charney, relayed the big question the family have been wondering all these years.
The family would like to know, was there another way that the events of that night in November 2016 could have unfolded? Was there a way that Daniel could have survived that interaction with the police?
The first day of the inquest heard testimony from Daniel's best friend, who described him as a very loyal, loving, and caring person who, although having struggled with alcoholism, prioritized his children above and beyond himself.
Although a taser was deployed the first time Lagarde approached OPP officers, knife in hand, he was allegedly unaffected and returned back into the home, only to return to approach them again, at which time Lagarde was shot in the abdomen by one of the officers.
And I think we'll see in this situation that there wasn't de-escalation. I think we'll see that officers were quick to use force.
In 2018, the SIU cleared the officers of any wrongdoing. At the conclusion of the inquest, the jury could make recommendations aimed at avoiding similar fatal interactions with police. Carl Langdon, TBT News.
The billion-dollar Waskin transmission line project has taken a major step forward. Hydro One has filed an application to the Ontario Energy Board for the go-ahead to construct the new power line between Thunder Bay and Dryden. The project is a partnership with a consortium of 9 First Nations. Hydro One is aiming to see construction completed in as little as 4 years. The first phase of the transmission line could be completed as soon as the end of 2025. That segment runs from the transformer station in Shunya all the way to the Mackenzie station in Atikokan. The second phase between the stations in Atikokan and Dryden could be in service by winter 2027. The project will add 240 kilovolts to the existing power line, offering plenty of capacity for potential new mines in the region.
There are many different mining connections that are in the application queue up in the region. As a general rule, and where possible on most construction projects, it makes a lot of sense to be able to draw upon a labour force as close and local to the actual project as could be.
The total price tag of the Waskin line will be $1.2 billion, which should mean plenty of hiring opportunities once boots and shovels hit the ground. Stunt driving charges in the Northwest region have doubled compared to last year. OPP Constable Matt Foster says from January 1st to July 23rd, their officers charged 84 people with stunt driving. There were 42 charges during that same time frame in 2022.
At speeds like that, your reaction time is less, your stopping distance is significantly less. So it's obviously very concerning, and we want to get our message out and educate the public what stunt driving actually is and what the penalties can be, in hopes that we can see less of these infractions on our roads.
The OPP have been posting photos online of their recent stunt driving arrest. Most of those charges were for driving 50 kilometers over the speed limit. But Foster says stunt driving also includes having all tires not in contact with the highway, driving on the wrong side of the road, and having someone in your trunk. Drivers who are charged with stunt driving will receive an automatic 30-day license suspension and a 14-day vehicle impoundment. Foster says in addition to those penalties, drivers are also issued a court summons.
If one is convicted in court of stunt driving, the fine is no less than $2,000 to $10,000. In addition to that, on a first conviction, the convicted driver would be subject to a driving prohibition for no less than 1 year or not more than 3 years. So it's a very serious offense, and which carries very serious penalties in the hopes that people are not traveling at these speeds.
2 people have died following a collision involving a pickup truck and an ATV in a small community north of Manitowoc. The call came into OPP and other first responders at around 3 o'clock Monday afternoon. Both the driver and the passenger of the ATV were pronounced dead at the scene. The driver of the pickup truck sustained minor injuries and was treated on scene by paramedics. OPP say the investigation is ongoing. A bronze statue of Queen Elizabeth II will soon be installed at the Ontario Legislature, and some Indigenous groups are taking issue with it. Siobhan Morris has details on the new statue, including a price tag and timeline.
Queen's Park is getting ready to welcome a new monarch. A foundation is being poured on the building's west side. Here, a statue of Queen Elizabeth II will be installed by the end of the year.
I am very, very excited to be able to honor Her Majesty. She was the Queen of Canada during a time of remarkable change.
The bill to taxpayers is $1.5 million. This is only a small model, but the real deal in bronze on a granite pedestal will be 1.5 times life size.
Prince Philip and I have met many thousands of Canadians.
The sculpture was inspired by how Queen Elizabeth looked delivering the speech from the throne in Ottawa in 1977. There will be a new cape and bouquet of maple leaves, one for each province and territory. The opposition doesn't feel there was enough consultation, including with First Nations communities. This statue is being added in the midst of ongoing debate about which figures in our history deserve to be honored. A statue of John A. Macdonald at Queen's Park's been boarded up 3 years, vandalized during a summer of reckoning on race and reconciliation. Calandra thinks there's space for Ontario to do 2 things.
Without sacrificing the celebrations of the great works that we've done, but also recognizing some of the parts of our history that we might not necessarily be proud of.
Sometimes putting a bigger spotlight on those dark moments.
Some have come to me and said we should have a recognition of residential schools on the grounds of the Legislative Assembly. I completely agree.
The Queen statue is the work of a sculptor who's molded other notable Canadians, from Oscar Peterson to Margaret Atwood, Glenn Gould, and John A. Macdonald.
Anytime they ever put up Caesar or Queen Victoria or any leader of significance, it's not simple.
She invites conversation about the stories of the people we celebrate.
They get shoved forward because of this kind of an endeavor, and that in itself has real value.
Siobhan Morris, CTV News.
Hewitt Noon MPP Solom Amakwa is among those saying more consultation was needed before moving ahead with the statue of the Queen.
For me anyway, and perhaps others, it represents colonialism, it represents oppression.
A statue of the Queen celebrates a legacy that Mamakwa says is one of broken treaties and atrocities against Indigenous people, including residential schools and the 60s scoop. He says that perspective should have been considered, with Indigenous people being consulted.
There's got to be a process where you have a process on how we're going to design what Queen's Park represents. And I know that, there's a man in a box that's covered at Queen's Park, and it's been covered for about 3 years. And the architect of Indian residential schools, and they don't know what to do with that.
Mamakwa says he wouldn't be surprised to see the new statue of the Queen covered up as well. He wants the government to prioritize instead a memorial to the children who never returned home from residential schools. Gull Bay First Nation wants a halt to new mining claims near their reserve. They're calling out the provincial government for allowing new claims to be staked on territory that is under an active land claim negotiation.
We're not being respected. Our rights are not being respected.
Gull Bay Chief Wilfred King says the province has breached their treaty rights and the duty to consult by allowing the registration of new claims within an area being considered for the expansion of their reserve as part of ongoing Robinson Superior Treaty settlement negotiations.
Right now, we're in the midst of settling, and that's the problem, is that we're in a land selection process right now as we speak, but yet mining claims are being registered. And under the system, once a mining claim is registered, those lands may be deemed not to be possible for addition to our reserve in the future. So it creates a legal problem for not only for Gull Bay First Nation, but also the mining proponent, but also even Canada and Ontario.
King wants an expedited amendment to Ontario's Mining Act to redeem the issue, or at least to have a notice put out to prospectors that the area is under consideration in a land selection process. The province did not respond to our request for comment before the broadcast. It's the 150th anniversary of the signing of Treaty 3, and a group of paddlers are commemorating the occasion with an epic canoe trip. We'll have that story after the break. Welcome back. Inspired by a canoe trip taken 25 years ago, the Rainy River First Nations are hosting a group of 50 paddlers as they embark on an epic journey. The commemorative canoe trip will take them to the remote location where Treaty 3 was signed 150 years ago. Carl Langdon reports.
A 7-day trip will see participants paddle 190 kilometers from the Kanachwanang Historical Center all the way to the northwest angle, the site of the signing of Treaty 3 back in 1873. General Manager of the Historical Center, Jim Leonard, presented the idea for the canoe trip during a discussion with staff. We caught up with Leonard on site, who spoke to us about the trip.
It's a time to go out there and share stories and share knowledge, and we have some elders that are coming along with us and some very young people. The youngest is 7 months old. The oldest is probably in their 80s, and they're going to canoe, and we'll make sure they have a good time.
Seth Lotaros, whose family is from Manitou, has been a guide and team member at the Historical Center for 7 years. He took us on an informative tour of the site and took some time to discuss the trip.
In these past 2 weeks I've been back home, I've been doing a lot of research into, what was Treaty 3? Where was it signed? Who signed it? Because it's important, and as young people, it's hard to, I think, want to learn about stuff like that when other people around you aren't. It's hard to take that first step. I think this canoe trip is part of that.
The starting point for the trip, Kanachwanang, also known as Manitou Mounds, holds significance to First Nations communities in the area, hosting a large number of burial mounds and village sites that are thousands of years old.
There was sturgeon in the water, and we fished here, especially in the spring, and people gathered here. So Kanachwanang is the place at the Long Rapids. So we've been here for thousands and thousands of years. It's very special to us.
Some of the village sites are estimated to date back over 5,000 years.
I think a lot of people also don't realize that this is a really big place for the process and ongoing like reconciliation, right? Education is a big part of it. We get a lot of tourists, and yeah, it's a touristy spot, but it's tourists that are willing to learn about our culture, and that always helps with helping us move forward.
The 7-day route will stop at a number of other First Nations communities along the way, where local elders will share knowledge and discuss the treaty. Paddlers will be welcomed at their final destination, the Northwest Angle, by a celebratory event organized by Chief Linda McVicker of Animkiwajing. Carl Langdon, TBT News.
The water system is up and running again in Admatong First Nation, and the hundreds of evacuees staying in Thunder Bay and Niagara Falls have all returned back home. Lee Noonan has more.
Water is flowing again nearly a month after a fire damaged the water treatment plant in Admatong First Nation. The system has been operational since Saturday, and after weeks of living out of a hotel, the hundreds of evacuees are now able to go home.
I mentioned that on our speakerphone while we were eating that that we're going home on Saturday. Starting Saturday, we're going home, and everybody clapped their hands and shouted that we're going home.
Councillor Louis Ashkanigish and his wife were among the evacuees. He says that while the evacuation was hard on many, particularly families with children, he's grateful for the welcome they've received.
It was a real nice hospitality from the Thunder Bay community, and I'd just like to thank everybody and all the workers from that worked coordinating.
While he appreciated the hospitality in Thunder Bay, Ashkanigish says he's excited to be getting back, heading out on Abmet Lake for some fishing, and being able to take care of things at home.
Well, first thing I'm going to do is I probably cut my grass and get my motor running and see if I can and get clean up the place around my house. So that's something I want to do, and maybe go down to look for blueberries in the evening and see if there's any yet.
At its peak, the evacuation saw just over 40% of the on-reserve population, nearly 700 people, forced from their community. After more than 3 weeks, they're glad to be heading home. Lee Noonan, TBT News.
Northwest Region OPP were dealing with several transport crashes on area highways this week. One of them involved a rig loaded with lumber, which lost control and rolled over on Highway 11 near Shabandawan. It happened late Tuesday morning. The shoulder of the highway and the ditch were covered in 2x4s following the mishap. The westbound lane had to be shut down while the overturned truck was removed and the lumber was cleaned up. OPP say the 45-year-old driver from Manitoba was not injured. He's been charged with making an unsafe move onto the shoulder. Then on Thursday morning, a transport crashed on Highway 11 near Rocky Bay First Nation. The vehicle was flipped onto its roof in the ditch. OPP, along with firefighters and paramedics, responded and helped extricate the occupants. The scene was later attended by an air ambulance. OPP say both occupants were transported to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. And after a short break, we'll have the details on new funding for the hospital in Atikokan. Welcome back. Thunder Bay Atikokan MPP Kevin Holland announced funding for the Atikokan General Hospital this week to help replace some of the hospital's aging infrastructure.
The Atikokan Hospital will be receiving $551,525 under the Health Infrastructure Renewal Fund.
The announcement comes as the Atikokan Hospital welcomes its new CEO, Jennifer Learning. She explains where the funds are needed most.
When the maintenance came and talked to me about they're having to get the electrician to find old parts from old electrical panels in order to replace what we have that breaks. We need to upgrade our electrical panel, we need our lights and our power, and the sewage system needs to be replaced too.
The hospital is almost 50 years old, so with a 50-year-old facility comes the need for reinvestment into the infrastructure, and our government is committed to.
It's kind of behind the scenes because everybody wants to see something shiny and something new, but you have to do the infrastructure before. As we want to grow our community, we got to maintain the facility that we have.
With major projects coming to the Atikokan area, such as the Waskin transmission line, the hospital expects to see increased use of their facilities, making those infrastructure repairs all the more necessary. Another leadership candidate for the Ontario Liberal Party was in the Northwest this week. Yasser Naqvi is one of the 5 candidates campaigning to lead the Liberals against the Ford government in the next provincial election. Mike Lang reports.
I'm running because I'm really concerned about the future of Ontario. Under Doug Ford, we're seeing significant harm to our healthcare system, which is the #1 issue that everybody talks about.
From MPP to MP to potential party leader, Yasser Naqvi spent 11 years in provincial politics in the Ottawa region, serving several cabinet roles in the Kathleen Wynne government. He also became the first visible minority to assume the role of Attorney General in 2016. Then after a 2-year stint as a federal MP, Naqvi announced in June his intent to run for leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. He brought his campaign to Thunder Bay, Kenora, Dryden, Fort Francis, and Sioux Lookout, and promises to make frequent visits to the Northwest if he becomes the Liberal leader.
In order for us to represent Northerners, Northwesterners, we have to come here. Not just once, but on a regular basis so that we can engage and talk to people, we can learn from them. But on top of that, what I want to make sure to build a team that is representative of Northern Ontarians.
Former Thunder Bay Superior North MPP Michael Gravel is a big supporter of Naqvi, as they served in cabinet together for many years.
For me, Yasser is the right one. One thing I always knew about Yasser was that he cared a great deal about Northern Ontario. Although he was representing Ottawa in the legislature, he cared a great deal, particularly when he was a cabinet minister, to make sure that he understood what were the priorities in Northern Ontario.
Several other leadership candidates have also made stops in the Northwest, including Nathaniel Erskine-Smith in late June. Presumed frontrunner Bonnie Crombie was in the Northwest in late July, meeting with Liberal Party supporters. The other 2 leadership candidates are current Liberal MPP Ted Hsu and Adil Shamji. Hsu will be in Thunder Bay next Thursday.
I think all 5 of us have the right motivations and working really hard to rebuild the Ontario Liberal Party and so that we can defeat Doug Ford in 2026.
September 11 is the last date for Liberal Party members to enter the vote for their new leader. The voting then takes place between November 25th and 26th, while the results will be announced on December 2nd. Mike Lang, TBT News.
A 63-year-old motorist from Alberta has been charged with careless driving after colliding with a police cruiser in Kenora. OPP say the incident happened on Lakeview Drive in Kenora in the early hours of Thursday morning. Police say the driver apparently fell asleep and collided with the side of the police cruiser while officers were conducting radar enforcement. Fortunately, no injuries were reported, but the cruiser sustained considerable damage. With smoke drifting into the region from wildfires to the west, the Thunder Bay District Health Unit recommends staying in, particularly for those who are at risk. Forest fires in Manitoba and even in the Northwest Territories are causing the smoke that has been hovering over many parts of the region this week, with a number of air quality advisories issued earlier in the week. Although air quality isn't too badly affected in most places, the Thunder Bay District Health Unit advises those who are at risk of health impacts to stay in when it's smoky out.
Seniors, pregnant people, young children,
outdoor workers, and as well as people with like chronic conditions like diabetes, cancer, and those with like lung or heart conditions. And so these people in particular, these members of the at-risk population, should really consider, rescheduling or, just avoiding outdoor activity, particularly that's strenuous.
And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this week's edition of Northwest Newsweek. Thanks so much for joining us.